Hi there everybody and welcome back to my channel After Dark, Coffee and Crime. And if you are new to my channel, as I say, hi and welcome. And if you have obviously watched me before, I really love having you back and chatting with you in the live chat when we premiere. So today's case, I'm going to be looking at the case of Darrell Brooks. Now, Darrell Brooks was something that I came across recently, and I watched through the entire trial. Darrell Brooks drove through the Waukesha Christmas Parade, in which he killed 6 people and he injured 70 others, and one of those who sadly passed away was a child. So as with all cases, I will give a trigger warning ahead of time, because obviously this case is going to talk about what happened, it's going to talk about the victims, and it will include some of the footage and some crime scene photos from around the area, and there will be discussions around domestic violence as well. So if that is something that you can't listen to right now, that's absolutely fine. We totally understand that. It's so important that you look after yourselves. So if that is the case, you can drop out of this podcast and you can join us on our next one, and hopefully we'll be able to see you there. As with any of the podcasts that I do, I always give the same information and the same warnings, and so I just want to say as well that the information that I am sharing through, I've sourced through information that I've seen on the internet, news articles, videos, books, and with this case in particular, information that I have seen and witnessed through the trial itself, and that the information is intended to be for informational and educational purposes only, and hopefully you'll get something from this that maybe you didn't know. But the information shared is designed, it's not designed to be anything other than informative, and not to upset anybody that may have been at the parade, that may know someone who was injured or someone that had passed away, family members or anybody like that, just to get the information out there and share some of the information that I have. So, what do we know about Darrell Brooks? In terms of him as a person, there wasn't a lot of information there at all, and in fact very little, to be honest, if I'm honest. But what I did source about him was that he was 39 years old at the time of this incident, that he had family in the Waukesha County, and the neighbours said that they saw him frequently sat in his car parked outside of his home, but they didn't really speak to him. He was also a rapper and was also known, as I hope I say this right, is Macboy Fly, and he was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Darrell Brooks is known to have 3 children, and he owes more than $40,000 in child maintenance payments for them. I'm not sure if that's what they call that in America as well. That's what we call here child support. And one of his mums to the children that he has said that he was actually an absent father and he wasn't involved in their lives in any capacity. And he was known by at least 3 states that had contact with him by the authorities out there through some of his actions and arrests and criminal history that he had. So I'm going to go through those because that brings us to his timeline. So back dating right to 1999, so on September the 5th, Darrell Brooks is charged with battery. That becomes a ongoing and frequent theme for him in Milwaukee, and he is given 3 years probation for that case. He's also charged with a couple of low-level crimes, marijuana possession, and a misdemeanor obstruction, and this was in 2002 and between 2003, and he is expected to serve a total of 70 days in House of Correction. Then he's charged in 2005 with obstruction, and he later fails to appear in court, and a judge has issued a bench warrant for him. In the year of 2006 of November, he's convicted of statutory sexual seduction and impregnating a 15-year-old girl in Sparks, Nevada. And this is something that gets raised through his actions during the trial. It wasn't meant to be mentioned, but in the court, it's then put out that he is a registered sex offender, and that this could come to light, and he kicks off massively during the trial about that.
And second of all, if we go down that road, we would be forced to counter that claim by pointing out that not only does the defendant not live with the child in question, he doesn't live with any of the other children that he has. He impregnated Erica Patterson when she was a minor in Nevada, and for doing so, he was convicted of statutory sexual seduction, pled guilty in March of 2007 to that felony offense, and is a sex offender on the registry as a result. So if there's any causation that would lead to Erica Patterson being a bad mom, Mr. Brooks has a direct role in that causation.
And that's
furthermore,
I object to that.
I'm not
because
done.
That's a lie.
Let
him finish. At the end of the day,
Let him
finish. If we're gonna open the door on that, no, since he want to make a record and not be accurate, so let's be accurate on the record. Since you think you know so much.
In 2007, he's actually on a documentary about methamphetamine addiction. Sorry, I struggled to get my tongue around that. And the documentary is called Crystal Darkness, and he does an interview on this show while he is in jail. In August of 2009, he is found guilty from the 2005 obstruction case, and he's given 2 days to serve. In 2010, in the February, Brooks is then charged with strangulation and battery and criminal damage to a property in Wood County after a woman told police he'd shoved her to the ground during their argument, and he grabbed her throat. So again, it's the second time that he's been charged with battery that we know of at this point by 2010. And he pleads no contest to the strangulation charge, but he is found guilty. In March of 2011, he is charged with resisting an officer in Milwaukee, and he is seen trying to flee a traffic stop sign. And when he is caught and stopped, he is not wearing a seatbelt. And when the officer approaches the car, he tries to put his car into drive, and the police officer who stopped him thought he was actually going to run him over. So you can already see here that there's a build-up of him having complete disregard for law enforcement. He has complete disregard for women. He's obviously got a disregard for even his own children. And so much is already being built up. So in 2011, his probation is revoked and he is sent to jail for 11 months. And there was actually a sweep in the year of 2012 in Nevada, and he'd actually spent some time living out in Nevada, and it was shown that he had actually provided a false address for his registration. So in 2016, he was arrested for failing to obey the sex offender laws, and that he had not been in compliance since his registry back in 2008. In 2020, in the month of July, on the 24th, he shot his own nephew, Angie Brooks. I'm not sure if that's how you say it. I apologise if I've said that wrong. And this was in a fight over a cell phone. His mother, nephew, they lived in the same 4-bedroom house in Arlington Heights. This is in Milwaukee now because he's moved back, and he was charged with 2 counts of using a dangerous weapon and a felony count of having possession of a firearm. In the May of 2021, Brooks is arrested by police in the Union City, Georgia, and this was in relation to a domestic violence case. So again, the domestic violence has come up as an issue again, and a man tells police he's confronted Brooks after hearing what sounded like beating a woman on the other side of a wall in a hotel. So again, in November of that month, he's arrested 3 weeks prior to the Waukesha attack for hitting his ex-girlfriend and ramming this same girl with a vehicle during that domestic dispute in Milwaukee. She actually tells the police that he runs over her leg and he's punched her, and this is during an argument at a gas station, and he is arrested and booked into Milwaukee County Jail. So even at this point, you've got to look at all of his behaviours. He doesn't really get a lot of time for his sentences. Some of them have been like 2 days. And then he gets rearrested, and he still seems to be walking about the street. And on one occasion, his mum bails him out for $1,000, and it is for this account actually where he runs this girl over her leg and punches her. His mum bails him out for $1,000, and had she not have bailed him out, and had he have had to have stayed in jail, then maybe the parade incident wouldn't have happened. And actually it caused an outcry of people, because he should have been behind bars. He shouldn't have been out, but unfortunately what he was. And on November the 21st, this is when he drives through the Waukesha Christmas Market. He is caught and arrested for that, and he is charged with first-degree intentional homicide. So what happened? Why did he find himself there driving through the Christmas parade? So on the day of the Christmas parade, it's known that he'd argued with his ex-partner. There had been a domestic dispute, again another domestic dispute, and from this domestic dispute is where he was fleeing from, and he fled in a sport utility vehicle, an SUV, and I believe it was his mother's car, and this was around 4:39 p.m. Central Standard Time, and he is known to have been driving the vehicle. Sorry, getting my words mixed up. He had been known to be driving at around 40 miles per hour, which is 64 kilometers an hour. And when he was doing this, he then drove and broke through the barricades set up on the road to keep cars driving through the parade, because obviously you've got all of the people that are running through the parade, the cars that are running slowly with, I'm guessing, sort of float, like what we call over here like floats, carnival floats. There was bands marching, so the idea is obviously to shut the streets off to keep everybody and the spectators who are watching safe, but he drove through this. And by doing this, he then drove past one police officer who tried to hit the bonnet of the car to stop him. And another officer fired his gun in an attempt to stop the vehicle, which in that moment then causes confusion with the people in the spectators watching, because they hear gunfire, so they're not sure what that gunfire is. And as we know from terrorist incidences that I've spoken about, people can confuse the gunfire, where it is and even what it is. So I do, from what I read, people were confused by that, and that was mentioned a few times throughout, through the trial. But that doesn't stop him, and sadly he continues driving, and that's when he makes his first contact with people in the parade. He ran his car into people, and it's where he struck his first victim. So as you can see above, I'm going to put a timestamp here as well, so if you don't want to see this video, you can exit now and skip forward if you don't want to see the video. But if you are watching this video, you'll be able to see that he hits that first person in the back of the parade there. It looks to be the marching band, and that first person he hits, and he doesn't care. He's hit them and he doesn't stop. He continues on his mission with his driving. During his mad driving spree, he drives through the group of the Milwaukee Dancing Grannies, which is basically composed solely of grandmothers, and the police say at this point he's deliberately targeting, the parade and the crowd, because he's zigzagging through the parade. And the prosecution argued that it was Darrell's intention to strike and hurt as many people as he possibly could, and he does manage to hurt a lot of people, as well as killing 6 people that we know sadly died as a result of Darrell's actions. During the immediate aftermath, there were 5 that had been confirmed at this point that were killed, and at this point there were 48 others that had been injured. And the 4 initial people who were confirmed at the scene who died were 4 women and a man, and sadly 4 of these were from the Marching Grannies band. And then later on, another victim, 8-year-old Jackson Sparks, died as a result of this incident and the injuries he sustained from Darrell Brooks's car. The police were able to recover the red car at some point after the incident and arrest Darrell Brooks. Initially, he fled from the scene, and he had been seen disposing of his clothing in a dumpster, which you can see above, and then he makes his way into a residential area, and he sees a man there at home, and he asks him if he can use his phone to call for an Uber, and tells this man that he is homeless. And this man testifies to this. He testifies and said he didn't feel like he was in any danger. He's used to helping people because of where he lives. There's often people that need help from the highway, and he let Darrell Brooks in. He let him call for the Uber. He offered him slippers. He made him a sandwich, and then he hears a lot of commotion. Now, he doesn't know what's happened in the Christmas parade at all. He just assumes that this man is who he says he is, that he's lost and he's an Uber, and that he's homeless, and he's got no reason to question that. And he realises pretty quick that something's not right, because, as I said, there's a lot of police activity in the area, which is unusual, and with Darrell having just turned up on his door, he feels that is a bit suspicious, and he asks him to leave, and Darrell's kind of like, oh no, it's okay, man, I just need to make this call, and he's very adamant that Darrell needs to leave the property, and so he does. He leaves without any further hassle. And Darrell isn't long arrested after he leaves the gentleman's house. In fact, he's arrested near the house. And And when he is interviewed by police, I'll pop a little snippet above, he isn't actually honest with them, and he tries to be dishonest. He tries to not tell the truth. He lies.
Okay, you've got a key in your pocket to a car in your mom's name, okay? And that key works for that car. For the love of God, Marcus. For yourself, for your family. You know what happened yesterday. For the people. Tell me what happened.
Well, what?
With the car.
What am I being
With
investigated
your mom's
for?
car. You were driving goofy. People called you in. You drove out of there in your mom's car.
And the police, the police tend to kind of allow the suspects to talk, and even though they may have evidence that corrects what he's saying, that shows him to have been lying, they don't say that immediately. And what they do is they allow him to do his talking. They ask him questions, and as they said in the court proceedings, that when they start interviewing him, they don't want to give him any kind of heads up that might give him an explanation that he can use in his testimony when he is talking. And they start with the lower end of the crime. They don't let him know that they know that he's the one that they're looking for in relation to the attack on the parade. They start off with the basic domestic incidents, and they do that because, like I said, they'll start small, work bigger, and they want to gain his trust, and they want to get the facts from him without leading him, so that he then can't say, well, I was led to say that, or he can't say things that he thinks the police wants him to say. So they have to be super careful. They don't want to interfere with his recollection of events either, and they want to give him a chance to be honest. And obviously, if he's not, it doesn't help his case further down the line. And so we are able to see in this day and age now, this is what I really like, and in America they do this a lot, where you can see the court, you can see the police transcripts, you can get a discovery, you can watch court trials, you can watch, like I say, you can watch the interviews. So much better in America for the public to see what goes on with their legal system. And when you are watching the trial, you are watching so much of the witnesses and the police, and you hear from the coroners and everything. And in this case, this court trial was I'm going to call it a doozy. It's a doozy. There's no other way to put this. He was watched by millions on the internet, and when you watch this, you want to pull your hair out. And when I go through the court proceedings and show you some things, you'll understand why you want to pull your hair out. But he was very difficult from the interviews with the police, who were trying to get the truth from him. He was difficult for them to work with and get information. He didn't make it easy. And after his arrest, and a little bit further down the line, we learn that there had been a total of 62 victims that had become injured, and then we heard that there had been the 6 deaths, which included the little boy who died, who was found to have died after the first 5 people. And in the beginning, Darrell pleaded not guilty. That was his, he wasn't guilty. And then he tried to have a plea of insanity, and then in the end, he decided to represent himself, and his mother pleaded to the judge to not allow him to do that, because she said that he wasn't mentally able to do that, mentally stable. she said that he'd got medical conditions. I think one of those was bipolar. But despite this, the judge questioned him. She went through things with him in court. She checked he understood certain things, and he did. He confirmed that he understood. He understood that if he was granted the motion, that he could, represent himself, that he couldn't then ask for lawyers. And he agreed to all of that. So it's just one of those things where he'd come across to the judge very well spoken, and that he understood what was happening. So he was granted the permission to obviously represent himself. And it's horrendous, really, because when some of these offenders, they get to represent themselves, it means they have access to, interviewing victims. And I find that really hard. And I find that I feel it's so wrong that someone can approach victims in a courtroom and ask them questions. And one of those, obviously, that he will have got to have interviewed, which he did, was the ex-partner. And I felt that he wanted to interview her to, what's the word I'm looking for? To, kind of interrogate her and make her feel horrible. And I can imagine that's how she felt when he was talking to her and asking her questions. I wouldn't want to be in that position. So the prosecution were arguing that Darrell had committed intentional homicide because he drove the vehicle without stopping through the parade, and at not any point did he stop. After hitting the first person, he didn't stop. After hitting the second, third and fourth, he didn't stop. As he took himself through, he didn't stop. So the intention was there to kill those people. However, Brooks had tried to argue that it was his car's fault, that it had a throttle malfunction, and he did that towards the end. And actually, it wasn't allowed as evidence in court because he tried to say the cars had been recalled when actually, the car had been assessed by police examiners, and even though the car may have had a recall notice, that would be something that the owner, which was his mother, will have had, and will have taken the car to the manufacturers or the garage where they would have rectified the problem. So he wasn't able to use that. He also said he tried to sound the horn and that the people in the parade just ignored him and he ploughed through them anyway. He also wanted to use that he was a sovereign citizen argument, and what this basically means is that the sovereign citizens generally live outside of government rules and laws. They believe they don't have to live by those laws and the rules set by government. And Judge Darrell, who was the judge presiding over this case, she did not allow him to use that as his argument that he was a sovereign citizen, and said that it was a defence without merit, and actually a true sovereign citizen would be living off of the grid, who, they are true sovereign citizens who live off, they don't pay taxes and that kind of thing. And he decided that he was a sovereign citizen during his time in prison. So, it wasn't an argument that he would be able to use anyway. And he kind of contradicts himself a lot, because despite saying he's a sovereign citizen, he also then believes he's got, his Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights, because he'd try and use them when it suited him. So as a sovereign citizen, he wouldn't be arguing that, because he's not following the rules and the laws that are set out by government and things like that. So he doesn't have, if he's not, a citizen of the United States following the laws and the rules, he wouldn't have Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. That's how I would understand it anyway. So again, his mum has been in the background trying to say that, that he should never have been allowed to represent himself, but he was found by the judge to be able to do that. So during the court process, it was very much evident from the very beginning that Darrell Brooks was trying to delay those proceedings. So initially he came into court, said that in prison he'd begun to feel unwell and that he'd tested positive for COVID, and he had been waiting on some results that he had been tested for and had been sent off for the COVID, and it was the longer results that he was waiting for, so it wasn't the rapid antigen test that he'd had.
Your Honor, I don't consent to being talked to in that fashion.
Your lack of consent is noted for the record. Please find the piece of paper, open it up, and please read it.
I will not consent to that, Your Honor. Or do I agree to that, Your Honor? I do not.
Mr. Brooks, then I'm going to advise the Sheriff's Department to find the piece of paper and hand it to me so that I can read it.
And
so that those are your two options.
What would be the basis for that, Your Honor?
Mr. Brooks, this is an issue that you raised, and I need to bring it to finality and know what the test result is.
Okay, with all due respect, it was a motion that I raised.
All right, I'm going to clear the courtroom. We're going to go off the record.
And he also was saying that the prison wasn't allowing him access to certain materials after certain times, and that he didn't have enough time to prepare his case. And the prison officer manager, I'm not quite sure what her role title is, but she was brought in to basically come to court and testify that he was, given the relevant test that he needed for the COVID, and that he had been allowed the relevant times to access the library and that kind of thing so that he could prepare for trial. He refused to wear civilian clothes on that day in court, saying he wanted to wear his prison clothes until he had the results. Don't know what the rationale for that was, but that's what he insisted, and the judge was trying to say, it will look better for you if you are in civilian clothes. And I don't know if that's to help prevent bias. I think it might be with the jury and intimidation, maybe, seeing that he's kind of the prisoner representing himself, possibly. And for the first couple of sessions he did wear his prison clothing. And the judge offered him, as I said, she offered him a quick rapid test. He refused that, and she was saying, but you're telling me that you are scared and we can get you a result now. And he declined that offer. Then when the results were available, he didn't want to share those with the judge. So the judge had the bailiffs brought in, and he was removed and put into another courtroom, and the test results were taken from him so that they could see the results. And it turned out that he was conveniently feeling poorly, thought he had COVID, but the test was negative. So no delay in the court was permitted. The court trial was going to be continuing anyway, and I think the 5 days. So even if he had have been positive, he would have been out of the area. But what the judge had said previously anyway was that the way that the court was laid out was that actually there was some good social distances. So even if he'd been tested positive for COVID, they would have continued anyway. Unfortunately, though, because the judge had him removed into the other room and the bailiffs actually get the results from him, this severely upset him, triggered him, whatever you want to call it, and his behaviour went rapidly downhill from there.
The test result could be obtained, and if necessary, by reasonable force. It's my understanding there was some type of situation or altercation between Mr. Brooks and the deputies. Ultimately, though, I think he was taken into the bullpen. He was brought back out, but it was very clear to me that he was upset. I think understandably so, but I needed to make a record of what was being done, including that I have obtained the test result, so there's an accurate record in this case related to the motion that was raised previously by Mr. Brooks. I want Mr. Brooks to know that I am not removing him from when the jurors are brought back in. It was just simply because he was upset. He was very loud when I walked into the courtroom before going on back on the record. He was yelling about his constitutional rights being violated. I advised him that if there was any type of use of force that he wanted to complain about, he could certainly do that through the proper channels with the sheriff's department. But just given his state of agitation and my need to make a record, I had him taken to the other courtroom. He is currently muted.
Because up until this point, although he was being a bit, he was being hard work, he hadn't lost his temper or anything like that. And so he started to get into the momentum of actually sort of showing more of who Darrell Brooks actually is, and his behaviour just escalated from there. And in one of the sessions of court, he took his top off, which is highly inappropriate, and that was when he was moved into another courtroom. He's quite frankly disrespectful, I feel, to the victims' families, to the judge, and just the court proceedings in general. And as we know, throughout the court sessions, he lost his temper quite a lot. And on a couple of sessions, he banged the table. And on one occasion, he had a stare-off with the judge, and it actually intimidated her. And she said that she needed to have a recess to calm down, and that she was quite frankly scared. Here is the clip up above. And
as long as the jury's out, we should probably discuss that. I would like to provide the defendant and the court with a copy.
So that had to be said. So it's the defendant.
That's not how it was said.
That was how it said. You want to run the record back?
Mr. Brooks.
So I'm the only one. I got one
Brooks,
ear that work, and I heard that.
This is to benefit you, so that
No, it's
you
not.
understand
Ain't none of
your
this to benefit
witness
me, so let's
has
be clear
a
about
prior
that.
record.
Your Honor, when I leave the table, I'm away from the courtroom, and I have to elevate my voice. This is the
So she had to
alleged
elevate her
record
voice
of Abel
just for that.
Stop talking.
Come on, man. Like, I don't know who y'all be thinking y'all fooling. I accept for value in return for value this document.
One more interruption and you're going to be removed to the next courtroom.
That's what you want to do anyway.
It's not what I want to do. Do not interrupt Attorney Opera.
So can
Your
you
Honor,
tell,
I
can
believe
you
he has 7 prior criminal convictions via OWI 2nd from 1997, and OWI 3rd from 1997, and OWI 4th from 2003, criminal trespass to dwelling from 2006.
All right, I need to take a break. This man right now is having a stare down with me. It's very disrespectful. He pounded his fist. Frankly, it makes me scared. And we're taking a break.
The stare was quite scary. Look at his face, and you tell me that that is not scary, the way he's scowling at the judge. He argued with the judge, and he did this on many occasions, and he was constantly repeating himself over and over again. And despite this, the judge held her cool. And I think he was beginning to accept as well that the court proceedings were going to continue no matter what he did. So, she gave him plenty of opportunities to stay in the courtroom. Equally, when it was necessary, she moved him out of the courtroom. And it just became a thing through the whole entire process that he would go out, and it was almost like delaying the court process, even if it was dragging it out through the day longer, which meant another day would be added on in total to the amount of time that they would be trying to wrap this up quickly. He could drag it out some more days just by his behaviour, because it would take time to move him from one courtroom to the other. So obviously it was being live streamed, and so you'd have quite a long break in between where they were moving him in his boxes backwards and forwards. So it was hard to watch, but very interesting. Like I said, I felt it was wrong that he interviewed his ex, that was the scene that he had fled from, but he was allowed to do that. And in the end, he did take it too far during the interview, and so the judge kind of tried to keep him in line, and then she stopped the interviewing, and he then was being Darrell and moved to the other room, and he wouldn't change his line of questioning, and then so they moved on. And this is kind of how it was, like he'd have a line of questioning and he'd try and change it, and he wouldn't stop on occasions, and it just grew out of hand. And the other problem that they had was that he kept objecting all the time, and he kept objecting to the use of his name being used, saying he doesn't consent to that, he doesn't identify with that name, even though that's the name he was given at birth, and that was the name he's been recognised on police interview videos and things like that. And just his whole way of asking questions and approaching, the witnesses. And it's almost like he was trying to say that nobody had seen it, that it was actually him who was the one driving the car, and, became a bit of a circus, and with the whole name thing, and he just objected, and sometimes there was no understanding what his point was, and if something had been explained many times, he didn't understand that. He didn't understand the role of the state and what that was, and that it was represented by the prosecution, and he kept trying to circle around that for a long time, and he just acted like a child, and he even tried to summon the state to the stand so that he could interrogate them and question them, but obviously that was denied. That he just didn't get the whole process, and despite explanation, that didn't sink in, and he would continue to do that throughout the process of the court. And when they're arguing like that, and when they're back and forth and stopping the court, starting the court, it's hard to follow, and I think he did that on purpose as a distraction, because it would make it hard for the jury to follow. They'd be in, they'd be out, they'd make their way half in, and then they'd be sent out again. So I don't know how the jury were thinking or what they thought. It was really difficult, and the fact that he was asking irrelevant questions, and he was going down that road of trying to say that it was an accident, and bring that thing in with the car and the brakes and the recall, and even though that wasn't allowed. And frequently during this trial, he obviously lost his right to stay in the courtroom, and he ended up losing his right to call any further witnesses because he just would not stop. The judge gave him plenty of times to correct his behaviour, and he just didn't, and he just got worse. He escalated, and that included then losing his mum testifying on his behalf. She wasn't allowed to do that, and then obviously his behaviour then escalated, and he kept saying it wasn't fair despite the amount of time. I don't think he thought the judge would actually pull through with it, but it got to the point where there was no choice. And so he lost his right to call witnesses, and he also lost his right to testify himself just through his inability to contain his behaviour and remain respectful and hold decorum in the courtroom. The judge was really calm with him. Judge Jennifer Darrell, she'd given him multiple chances. I don't know how she did it. I said all along she needed a mega pint and a mega holiday after, what had gone on. She was so patient with him, and a lot of people misunderstood that patience as a weakness, and they kept saying, watching the chat that I was in during the proceedings, so saying she's too soft on him, but she had to give him a lot of chances. She had to be patient with him. She didn't want him to have the argument of a mistrial, so I can understand why she did that, but some didn't. And especially when she's implementing things and letting some things go and then bringing him back and giving him multiple chances to come back in the room. It seems like when you're watching it, why have you brought him back 5-6 times? But she has to be seen to be being fair, and she also tried to have him act in a professional way in the courtroom in front of the jury, and she would give him advice on, hey, you know, about the clothing, not wearing prison clothing, and, you know, how he behaves in front of the jury, because it will all go against him. But none of that really sank in, and he just continued to do what he wanted. But I feel she did a great job, and I don't know what the jury were thinking, especially on the occasions where they would be dismissed from the courtroom quite suddenly, or they would make their way back in, and before they'd got the first juror through the door, because they'd be waiting to come in, they'd be sent off again. I really don't know what they thought. So again, towards the end of the trial, he almost lost his right to give his closing arguments, and he even pushed his luck during that moment as well. But the judge and the prosecution came up with a plan for him to allow him to do his closing argument, because otherwise, as the prosecution was saying, it would just be back and forth like this all of the time, and they needed to get this done so that they could get through the process and then get the jury out for their deliberations. So he was allowed to do his closing statement, because it wasn't used, you know, the closing statements as evidence. It was just a closing statement to close their arguments. And so he did. He pushed his luck, they managed it, and then they were able to then proceed with the jury to give them jury instructions. And, you know, despite him having sort of tried to say to the jury that they'd, you know, been given some information and not all of the information and that kind of thing, obviously they were guided to strike that and disregard that wasn't evidence and that kind of thing. So I feel that they did manage that quite well. So following the closing arguments, the courthouse actually stayed open quite late so that they could begin them, and then they picked them up the next day, and it literally took the jury 3 hours and 15 minutes to find Darrell Brooks guilty on all 76 counts. And obviously, even though he's been found of 76 counts, 6 of those are first degree intentional homicide, he still has to be sentenced. We haven't had that phase of the trial yet. So what I will do once we have that information is I will obviously update on my channel. But I, for one, am very much looking forward to seeing what sentence the judge hands down to him, because he gave her a nightmare of a time in that court, and you could see she was exhausted. And so this is going to be her time, as I would say, for a little bit of payback. And given his criminal history and obviously the amount of injuries and obviously with the deaths in this case, I'm hoping he gets a good sentence, and I think he will. I think the judge will, you know, give him his just desserts in that respect in terms of sentencing. I don't think it will be very light at all. And I feel it will be quite satisfactory for her, for the victims, and for the people like us that were watching the trial and watching him abusing the system, which he did. It will be very satisfactory to see sentencing. So I will be there for that, and I will probably upload that section when she hands out the sentencing. Despite his behaviour, he has shown no remorse. He's shown no accountability. It was all about him. He didn't care about the families, and he didn't care about those with those lifelong injuries. His aim was to just delay everything, and I think those outbursts and his whole behaviour was the aim, and actually the judge managed him well. You know, they wrapped this up relatively quickly compared to some court cases, and I am looking forward to seeing his sentencing, and I'm hoping that everything that the judge did in terms of her patience and allowing him backwards and forwards and trying to get him in the courtroom as her preference, so that there's no chance of a mistrial. I hope that there's no issues and that obviously there's nothing that he can really appeal on, and that he serves the sentence that he should for the crimes that he's committed. And obviously his past isn't going to help him either. He's had quite an easy ride of it before in terms of sentencing and punishment, and hopefully this is the punishment that he's going to get that he deserves. It is the first time that he will get a sentence that he deserves because of everything that he's kind of got away with previously. And as with all of my videos, as I like to close out, obviously there were quite a lot of injured victims, and I don't have all the names for those, but I do have the names for the victims who sadly lost their lives, so I am going to share those with you now, and we can then think about those victims as we play them out and their names and pictures out with some music. So we have Virginia Sorensen, who was aged 79, Leanna Owen, who was 71, Tamara Durand, 52, Jane Kulish, 52, and Wilhelm Hospital, 81, and of course Jackson Sparks, who was just 8 years old, who succumbed to his injuries and passed away. Thank you for listening, everybody. It is a horrible situation that occurred. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all very soon on my next podcast. Bye for now.